Welcome back to the Canine Campus podcast. This is episode 18 and our first podcast for 2009. If you're new to the show, we hope you like it, and if you've been with us for a while, then welcome back. This week, we'll answer some listener messages, talk about handling, and get a look at what's ahead for the podcast in the coming year. Devin, welcome back.
Welcome back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. We've been getting a lot of feedback on the show, a lot of positive reinforcement to keep it going, and so we thought we'd start out this episode with some of the notes we've gotten from our listeners. A few of you have some questions that we'll be answering in upcoming episodes, so if you don't get it here, stay subscribed. It's coming soon. Devin, why don't you walk us through some of the messages?
Okay, I want to thank everyone for clicking and treating us for doing these podcasts, because it's very nice to get questions, but also people just checking in and saying, I'm really enjoying them. When are some new ones coming? So
Right.
I wanted to thank Lynn in Milton, Wisconsin. She sent an email hoping that we would be back recording podcasts. Laura in Georgia is a Greyhound adopter. And those of you that have listened to our past podcast might have remembered in the episode we did, What to Consider When Considering a New Dog, we talked about some of the benefits of a rescued Greyhound. The primary benefit being that they really don't need a lot of exercise, as counterintuitive as that might seem.
Right.
You know, they run 50 feet, they're done for the day. And Laura wrote in, as I said, from Georgia to say that it was the most fantastic decision that she had ever made. She's had a lot of other dogs. She actually competes with her Greyhounds. I mean, this is someone that works with them.
Competes in
competition, obedience.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
But, on the days or weeks that she is too busy and doesn't really have the time to work with them, she said that it's just another excuse for them to take a nap, which they love. So I was happy to hear that. And there are so many Greyhounds out there that could use homes. So.
Right.
We had an email from Bangkok. Rowan
Thailand.
in Bangkok, who's actually going to be moving back to Australia soon. He might actually already be there. And he doesn't have a dog yet, but he's doing a lot of research into getting a dog. He had some questions about raw diet. He had a number of questions, but the first one they asked was about raw diet. We've kind of talked a little bit about this in the past. Not going to get too deep into it this evening.
Right.
But we feed our dogs a raw diet. And Rowan's primary question was, is it okay if I wait until the dog is a year old before I start feeding a raw diet? Because I would like to use kibble in training. Right. And I just wanted to let him know you can switch to a raw diet whenever you want. But you don't have to wait till your dog's a year old. Our dogs actually get both.
Right.
They were on a kibble-based diet, a high-grade kibble-based diet for, the husky for most of her life.
Right.
And still to this day, they get a little kibble, because if we need to board them, there's very few boarding facilities that have the space to, hold 30
or
pounds.
the refrigeration.
Right. So they actually get both. Now, not at the same time. You can't mix them together. But there's plenty of people that feed primarily raw diet, and for one meal during the day, their dog gets kibble. So you don't have to wait till your dog's a year old.
Right.
A couple things about raw diets. Definitely research them. There's some really good books out there. Ian Billinghurst is an Australian vet whose book Barf, Bones and Raw Food Diet was sort of the forerunner of this. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of other books out there now. I also highly, highly, highly recommend the Whole Dog Journal. I don't know if I've mentioned them in past podcasts, and if I haven't, it was a grave omission on my part, because Whole Dog Journal is a phenomenal monthly journal that concentrates on positive training. Pat Miller is, in fact, their training editor.
Right.
And each year they evaluate all sorts of diets. So they have the kibble issue, then they have canned food. The canned food issue is actually out right now. They have raw blend issue. These are manufactured foods, but they also have tons of information on how to make your own raw diet. If that's what interests you, we do not make our own raw diet.
Right.
We get a blend. So Whole Dog Journal, you can find them on the web. I recommend subscribing. You'll get more information about diet, holistic approaches to things, and also traditional approaches to things. They're just a wonderful resource. Whenever I'm researching anything, I go there first.
Right, and you can find Whole Dog Journal on the web at www.whole-dog-journal.com, or just Google Whole Dog Journal. They're the first thing that comes up.
It's the best subscription you'll ever pay for. And we've had a couple of people use our online leave a voice message feature.
Right, at caninecampus.com.
At caninecampus.com. One was Diane from Southern California. Thank you, Diane. She left a very positive message, and she's been enjoying our podcast, so we appreciate that. And we also had a message from Ted, who had a question about drive. He has a German Shepherd dog, and his question was how to control drive. Once you've sort of turned the on switch on and you've gotten a high drive state, how do you then turn it off?
Right.
And I would like to address this in a future podcast with a friend of mine who's a really amazing dog trainer and who works with high drive Aussie Shepherds and agility. Until that podcast gets recorded, I would recommend that Ted check out Susan Garrett's books and website. She has trained numerous agility champions, national and world champions. And she has a video out called Crate Games, which is a phenomenal resource for anyone, not just puppy people. If she actually uses the crate to teach that on-off switch and self-control, because what you're talking about with an off switch is self-control.
Right.
And it's something you can teach, and there's a whole bunch of self-control games you can play with your dog. And Susan Garrett goes through a lot of those in that video.
Gotcha.
There's also a book called Control Unleashed by Leslie McDevitt. That's, in the last couple of years, really become very popular in the agility and performance world. And that is definitely worth checking out as well.
Gotcha. And Susan Garrett can be found at clickerdogs.com. Her material may be available on DogWise. I haven't checked that out, but
I wouldn't be surprised. It's also most likely available from her website. She's up in Canada. She has training camps throughout the year. And I know that my friend who's the phenomenal trainer has just learned so much from her and goes back year after year and learns new stuff all the time.
Right. So we're going to try and get her back on the show and talk about that, Ted, to answer your question. So thanks for leaving a message. And to everybody that did leave a message or send us an email, it's great positive reinforcement for us. We haven't done a podcast since June of 2008. And there's been a lot going on at Canine Campus. We've upgraded the facility, we've added new classes, and we've been kind of retooling everything. So this is a part of that. Ted, we're going to answer your question very, very soon, hopefully within the next couple of podcasts. But leave us a message, give us a call. If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach Canine Campus and the podcast and Devin at caninecampus.com. You can email Devin at caninecampus.com or podcast at caninecampus.com. And you can give us a call at area code 434-973-1050. That's area code 434-973-1050. And leave us a message. We'll do our best to answer the question on the show, and know that that contact with our listeners is great reinforcement for us to keep this going and to give us ideas for the show.
If you have a computer with a microphone, you can also leave a message on the front page of our website.
Right. So today we want to talk about handling, Devin, right?
We do want to talk about handling, and before we get to handling, I just wanted to let everyone know that Patricia McConnell, who we've spoken about so much on past podcasts, we've referenced her books. She has a new website. She's actually sold her old training business, and now she has a new website, patriciamcconnell.com. And it's McConnell, McConnell.com. She has an amazing blog. Every hour there's something new and interesting that she's writing there.
Oh, wow.
It's a wonder. She has resources for trainers there. So check that out. There's, she's totally retooled her stuff. And
I just pulled it up, and she's got YouTube videos on here. The front page, she's got Trisha's new favorite trick, hiding her head under a pillow. Mm-hmm. This looks amazing. And, of course, a really easy way to get access to her books and DVDs We love Patricia McConnell, one of the most eloquent speakers on behavior we've ever seen.
And her energy infuses, I mean, she's all over that website. I think that website so represents her, and it's updated all the time. I don't know how she finds the energy to do that and be a professor at the University of Wisconsin, as well as a speaker that's speaking nationally all the time. So.
Yeah. And a quick note on this, she's got her blog, which is off of patriciamcconnell.com, another URL, theotherendoftheleash.com. And blogs, if you've been following the Canine Campus blog, which if you're listening to this podcast, you may have been unknowingly, we're doing the same thing. A little more lighthearted, perhaps, than what Patricia was doing, but a great way to keep up with kind of breaking news on what's going on in the behavior world, without a doubt. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about handling. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with the Canine Campus podcast. Welcome back to the Canine Campus podcast. Today we're talking about handling. Devin, there's a number of definitions for this term, another number of contexts to talk about handling. What are we talking about today?
Today we were talking about handling in terms of grooming and veterinary exams. So not for confirmation or other adventures with your dog.
Gotcha. So this is kind of the wet noodle that you and I talked about.
This is turning your dog into a wet noodle. And Kathy Sadeo, who I've talked about in previous podcasts, who's used to be a dolphin trainer. She was also a zookeeper. I, a few years ago, went to a seminar of hers on Pavlovian conditioning. And part of that addressed handling, being able to cut your dog's nails. And we're going to use cutting your dog's nails as our example, but the training techniques that we talk about apply to anything you want to do physically to your dog, whether it's, cleaning their ears, brushing their teeth, putting a little, or we probably shouldn't use that product, putting a flea or tick product on their back, shoulders. So same techniques.
We'll edit that out later.
Same technique's going to be used for all of, for any of those things. We're just going to speak specifically about nail clipping.
So this is about the things that you've got to do physically with your dog, making it comfortable for your dog, making it easy for you, facilitating physical interactions with the dog.
And so this is when I need to come clean, because I was a handling weenie. And even though I talked about it big time in class, and we have a dog that'll let you do anything to her.
Right.
We also have a hound whose nails were longer than Lucretia Borgia's.
It's true. They were
it's
horrible.
appalling.
Yeah.
And I would see my friends, my vet, who was my mentor, and she would be like, how can you possibly be lecturing your clients on this when your dog's nails look the way they do? And the problem is that I had quicked him. I had cut his nails a couple of times, many times, and then, actually I take that back. I had not done his nails many times. I had probably cut his nails 10 times in his life. And 2 of those 10 times, I cut him to the quick, literally, and he bled and screamed like I had stabbed him with a butter knife.
Positive punishment.
It was positively horrible for him and for me. So, and ironically, I had quicked him once, and then I went to Purdue University's behavior modification program called the Dogs Course, and came back completely jived to desensitize him to nail clipping. And within an hour and a half, I was cutting nails again. And in that same session, managed to quick him for the second time. And that was when I hung up my clippers. So then you're going to say to me, Devin, when did your dogs get their nails clipped? Pretty much never. On the rare occasion that they got knocked out for something, I would not have them anesthetized for this specifically. But if there was a tooth removal, or if there was a reason that they had to be anesthetized, that's when they would get their nails clipped. So I went to see Kathy Sadeo on this Pavlovian conditioning seminar, and as I mentioned, she was a zookeeper. And she brought up how bizarre a concept it is that you wouldn't be able to cut your dog's nails.
Right.
And that as a zookeeper, if you don't file an elephant's nails, they will die. Literally. Like, it's literally a mortal thing for an elephant.
Wow.
Because walking is so important.
So,
And she's like, you cannot anesthetize an elephant
of course
every
not.
month.
So dangerous.
So,
to do that,
her whole point was, look, in zookeeping, we've had to Pavlovianly condition these kinds of veterinary exams, grooming exams for years. And whether it takes 1 month or 6 months, you don't have any other choice. I mean, this is what it is. It's the only way you can keep these animals safe and healthy.
Right.
So as she's talking about this, like, I'm crawling further and further in shame in my chair. Like, oh, she's speaking to me. She knows what a horrible pet owner I am. Or I should say, pet cohabitator I am. So she, what she did was she lit my enthusiasm, because even though I already knew the technique,
right,
I think that it's always really helpful to see videos of people doing it from beginning to end.
Of course, yeah.
And so when I left Kathy Sadeo, my goal was within 1 month, working 3 to 4 times a week, 20 to 45-minute sessions, that I would be able to shave the end of a nail. So all I want to do is shave the end of a nail.
By filing it, right?
No, with clippers.
With
clippers,
okay.
just barely clip the tippy end of the nail. And that was my goal. So I want to state to everyone that if we're talking about nail clipping, that needs to be your goal. Your goal is not to cut the nail proper.
It's to start very slow, to get just a little tiny bit, not the whole. So if you were cutting your own nails, you wouldn't be cutting it down to where you wanted them to be. Ultimately, it would be just a little tiny bit off.
Right. And there's
starting with that.
And the reason for this is more varied than you would think. This is not just so you won't quick the dog.
Right. Okay.
This is not just so the quick has a chance to recede, because what happens is as the nails grow, the blood vessel in the nerves, which is the quick, goes down, starts growing with the nail. And so as you start cutting off the end of the nail, there needs to be time between cuttings for the quick to recede.
Gotcha. So the more lightly you do this, the easier it's going to get.
Well, more importantly, you need the practice.
Right.
So what needs to happen with handling, and I'm just going to tell everyone this because I have tried it both ways, and this really only works one way. You have got to get to the point where you are prepared to clip nails every week. And I don't mean all 10 nails in one session. Right. I mean a couple of nails, you sure shave off the end of the session, couple, then you're maybe using toothpicks, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So why you need to do this is less for the dog and more for you.
Just to get the hang of doing it properly.
You
without
have got to
injuring the
get
dog.
comfortable. What happens is people warm up and they feel like they've desensitized. But the second they actually go to clip that very end of a nail, that tippy end, they freak out, right? Their heartbeat accelerates. It's like a little hummingbird's heart. Sweat starts pouring out of every pore. Sure. Adrenaline goes bananas, and the dog immediately knows something's up.
Right.
And that you're stressed, and they should be stressed too. So my point is, by doing this so many times and so often, and in such a sort of benign fashion, not only are you counter conditioning the dog to thinking this is a good experience, I'm bonding with my human and good treats are happening, you are counter conditioning yourself that this is a good way to bond with your dog, that this is no big deal.
That you don't have to be panicky about it.
And that isn't this fun. Right. And, if anything, since then, did I cut Silly's nail accidentally? He sort of moved it as I was clipping. Mm-hmm. I did not quick him. He did not bleed, but he yipped a little bit. And, yay, wasn't that great? Treats rain from heaven. And I just kept about my business. I mean, it didn't change a thing.
So we've talked about the human side of it. We've talked about learning how to do this so that you're not panicky, and that there's kind of a technique to it, there's no doubt. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about conditioning the dog to love having this done. We'll be right back talking about handling on the Canine Campus podcast. If you're interested in sponsoring the Canine Campus podcast, there's no better way to reach thousands of invested and really serious, sometimes kind of scary serious dog people.
Devoted
dog people. Yeah, exactly. So there are plenty of opportunities for sponsoring the podcast. If you'd like information on how many thousands of people you can reach and what the show's all about, drop Devin a line at devin@caninecampus.com. That's DEVEN at caninecampus.com, or give us a phone call at 434-973-1050. We're back with the Canine Campus podcast talking about handling. We've been talking about teaching yourself how to handle your dog. And the bigger part of it is probably after you've got the technique down to an extent, getting the dog comfortable and conditioned to, being what we call a wet noodle, and really not only letting you do this, but really being enthusiastic about the process. Devin, what's the trick with this whole thing?
Well, the very dog that I quicked twice, who would run at the sight of the clippers, now sees the clippers and starts jumping up and down like a lunatic, right, handing me his paw. This is Pavlov, plain and simple. This is what Pavlov gave us. So I want to do just a quick primer again on the difference between Pavlovian and Skinnerian conditioning, because the use of food is totally different. Mm-hmm. So when we talk of food as a reward, what we're really talking about is operant conditioning, which was brought to us by B.F. Skinner. Basically, the dog makes a good decision, and as a result, something good happens. So when you're using operant or Skinnerian conditioning, the dog's behavior is critical, because that determines whether or not there's a reward.
Right.
Pavlov is completely different. If you think about the original Pavlovian experiment, a bell rings, dinner comes, a bell rings, dinner comes. The dog's behavior in that experiment was irrelevant. They didn't have to do anything to get the bell to ring. They didn't have to do anything after the bell rang and dinner was brought in. In other words,
it's pure association. There's no decision involved.
That bell means dinner.
Right.
So their behavior's irrelevant. So whether they jump up and down and go crazy, the dinner still comes. Because their behavior isn't causing the dinner. The bell is causing the dinner. So when you're working with handling your dog, let's say for nail trims, any touch you make to your dog's body causes the treat. If your dog recoils at your touch, they still get the treat. Mm-hmm. All that recoiling tells you is that your touch was too invasive and you need to back off. So for example, if your dogs are already really worried about paw handling, you need to start with their shoulder. You might start with their ear, you might start with their tail. You might spend 5 sessions just tapping their tail, giving them a treat, tapping their shoulder, giving them a treat, before you ever get even down to their elbow. But before you move closer to your target area, they have to be utterly comfortable and relaxed when you're touching the previous area.
So you really have to work up to this slowly.
You have to work up to this slowly, and the goal is to have no reaction at all. And again, if you have a negative reaction, the dog still gets the treat. You just need to change how you're interacting with the dog, how you're handling the dog.
Gotcha.
So that's the most important thing. It also really helps if you use a unique treat your dog does not get any other time in training, ever.
We use cat food.
We use wet cat food. It's a little messy, but cat food is really stinky and delicious. Cats are finicky eaters, so it's a very flavorful food.
Right.
And it's easy to deliver really quickly because I can just put a little on the tip of my finger.
And it's easy to find.
Because in a 20 to 45 minute session, I probably treat, boy, you know something, I think we should time this. I think we should actually time the next time I do this.
We'll get back to you on that in the next podcast.
Yeah, because it's probably 500. I mean, it's like tap treat, tap treat, tap treat. I'm really that fast.
Right.
So the first thing you need to do is condition your dog to thinking that you're touching their body is great. And once they're happy with you just tapping their body all over, then you can start holding your hand a little bit longer. Rather than tapping the elbow, sort of pressing gently against the elbow, or even putting your hand all the way around the elbow and grasping it slightly for a few seconds. And so basically that's one part of the equation, is making your touch a really fabulous thing, that they think when you touch them, something really good happens, because it does. You also need to apply the same strategy to whatever equipment you might be using. So if it's a clipper, you might want to have it on the ground for 2 or 3 sessions. Have them, if they sniff it, they get a treat. If they touch it, they get a treat. If they're leery of them already, if they even look at it, they can get a treat. Once they're comfortable with that and they're kind of exploring it on the ground easily, you can put it in your hand and they get a treat. Now, if you're using some sort of electronic device, like a Dremel or some other device that makes a noise, you want to introduce that separately. First, get them, 5, 10 sessions of, this is the device in my hand. Then when you do turn it on, it needs to be on the ground, far away. Turn it on, off, treat, on, off, treat, on, off, treat. So again, this noise, this weird thing causes a treat. And I really learned this. It was fascinating. And this is part of the worksheet that I had directed people to on the APDT website by Terry Long. One of her suggestions is to clip toothpicks because of the sound.
Right.
And so I was 10 feet away from Silly, who was the dog I clipped twice, and I cut a toothpick, and he literally pulled his paw up and back, and I wasn't anywhere near him.
It sounds just like a nail.
The sound alone, he was conditioned to hating. And so I spent 3 sessions 10 feet away from him, clipping a toothpick, throwing a treat, clipping a toothpick, throwing a treat. And I actually got to the point where I could hold his paw in my hand with a toothpick and clip the toothpick.
In the same way that you counter-conditioned him to the equipment, you counter-conditioned him to the noise by slowly moving the toothpick to closer proximity while treating him. Or clipping the toothpick while treating him.
And at first I started, when I finally did get his paw in my hand and the toothpick was on top and not even really touching his paw. It's just when I clipped it, I wanted it in that vicinity, and I also wanted kind of the vibration in my hand of the clip.
Right.
And then I eventually worked it so that the toothpick was underneath his paw. So when I clipped it, he could really feel it. And when I started, the very first time I clipped a nail, I had spent 20 minutes prior to that clipping toothpicks, because one toothpick you can clip 50 times. I mean, you can just shave off the end just like you need to do with the toes. And then when I did clip one little nail, I immediately went back to the toothpicks. So I was like, ooh, that was a little interesting, but now I'm back to toothpicks. So the very first session when I clipped a nail, I only clipped one nail. I probably worked for 45 minutes and went through 2 toothpicks.
Right.
Now, interestingly enough, I've just gotten the Petit Paw, which is the Dremel-like device. And we have a Dremel, but it's really loud.
So, and the Petit Paw, for those that aren't familiar, is kind of a power tool. It's a battery operated.
You can get them anywhere.
It's a rotary sander, basically.
It's a rotary sander, but it's not quite as powerful as the Dremel.
Right.
It's not quite as intense.
Right.
I think it's much quieter.
So lower voltage, it's quieter. It's got a sanding disc on the top with a plastic cup around it.
It's got a plastic cup on it, so when you are filing, it's catching your filings.
Right.
Now, I will say this about the Petit Paw. I mean, I now have been happily cutting Silly's Silly's toes for, a year. But when I introduced the Petit Paw, which I just did this month, I essentially had to start from scratch. I had to put it down on the ground. Now, I didn't have to decondition his body as much because he's used to me handling his paws, but I had to put it down, device off for a few sessions, and he could touch it. And then I would pick it up and touch him with a treat, all off. And I was touching his shoulder, his back, his tail, his ears.
Right.
Then, I would turn it on.
Conditioning to the device, not the activity.
So much. Although, so then I would do the sound, on, off, on, off, on, off, and each time treat in between. So on, off, treat, on, off, treat. Then what I found was the vibration was kind of weird. So I'd turn it on and I'd touch his shoulder and I'd turn it off and I'd treat. And at this point in time, I've had 4 sessions and I'm at the point where I have, and by the way, I brought the toothpicks back. So I went back to, because the device sounds one way just turned on. It sounds another way filing a toothpick or a nail.
In a sense, the toothpicks are modeling the nails in a less sensitive way.
Right, whether it's a clipper, whether it's a manual file, or whether it's some sort of electronic file. So I think the toothpicks are really critical.
Yeah.
And so I went right back to the toothpicks, and the second I touched the toothpick to it, he jumped back. He got very worried, and I wasn't even holding him at that point. I mean, I literally had a toothpick in one hand, the petty paw in the other, and he was 2 feet away from me, and I just touched it for a nanosecond, and he jumped back. The sound is startling. He still got a treat. And, but the next time, rather than filing the toothpick as I took the toothpick and I just touched it to the outside cap of the petty paw while it was on. So there was a little bit of vibration, a little bit of noise, not quite as intense, and worked until he was comfortable with that. And so now I've actually gotten to the point where I can touch a nail, just barely touch it, to the actual rotating device, have not, in effect, filed.
Right.
And it might be another 2 weeks before I do.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. We've talked about counter condition, which could probably really be its own podcast or a whole college course, let's be honest. But we've talked about the human side of this, the dog side of this. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with a really, really cool trick, kind of a human trick, kind of a dog trick, for making this even easier. Not so much the handling side of things, but for getting the dog to do their nails. So you're listening to what's turning out to be the manicure episode of the Canine Campus podcast, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Canine Campus podcast. We're talking about handling and manicures.
It's spa day.
It's spa day at the Canine Campus podcast.
Spa day for the pooches.
And so we've talked about what to do for yourself. We've talked about counter conditioning and kind of not only how that applies to the problem with long nails, but how that can apply to just about anything.
Same technique works for any handling.
Any handling you want to do. Going to the vet. What we call the wet noodle is the ultimate handleable dog. And Devin, you had somebody write in with a really neat trick.
This is actually a client in my class. I'm teaching a handling class right now, and where people come and basically, the goal is after 4 weeks to be able to clip the end of one nail. And
right. So it's a slow and steady.
Right. We actually call it the Zen class because I feel like there's a lot of meditation that goes on in this class because it's a very, it's not like, okay, class, now we're all going to do this together. I mean, everyone's working on their own thing. Well, some of those in the class, a total doggy person, she has a search and rescue dog. So,
oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
She said, have you ever heard of a doggy nail file? And I said, what are you talking about? She said, you can make a nail file. They can file their own nails. Well, this was like ding, 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 because for those of you that have been listening to previous podcasts, I'm a huge fan in, armchair training. It's like one of my favorite things in the world.
How easy can this be made for me,
Well, the dogs that we have in our lives, for the most part, are descendants from working dogs. They're supposed to have jobs, and many dogs do not. So I'm a huge fan in giving a dog a job. Okay, so I went looking for this, and I don't know if this is the woman that originated it or not. But anyway, I found it at Shirley Chung's website, which is www.shirleychong.com. Basically what she does is she takes a board and she puts on it the no-grip tape that you get for stairs, the slip-proof tape.
Which is, so it's like sandpaper.
It's sandpaper. So you've made a giant emery board. Mm-hmm. And then through shaping, she teaches dogs, and if you've got a digger, if you have a dog that likes to dig, it doesn't take much to teach us. According to her, she has yet to meet someone that could not master this easily. So the front paws, they basically scratch the board, and they're filing their own nails. The back paws are a little bit trickier. She actually captures the back kick after a dog poops. So, many dogs sort of poop and kick up in the air, and she captures. I'm sure you could shape it too. But it sort of cracks me up because she cautions people not to leave this out when you're not home, because apparently once dogs catch on to it, they have filed to the point of quicking themselves.
Wow.
And humans come home to little bloody paw prints all over the place. Also, if your dog has really long nails, she says, don't worry about the unevenness of the initial pawing. And I guess dogs even learn to cup their nail.
I'm sure to keep their pads off, right?
And the client that I have in the class, she's tried a couple of different grits. So she has some dogs that were really good about cupping paws and really kind of got it, and they've got a slightly grittier one. She has one dog that was a little slower on the uptake, and that it was scratching his pads just a wee bit. So she started out with a less gritty sandpaper. But I love this idea. I love this idea. And in fact, rather than have my handling class graduate and they were all doing really well and had all sort of achieved their intermediate goal, we are continuing the class and building these nail files because we all want to see how it's going to work. So I'm incredibly excited about this. I think it could be a lot of fun. So I don't actually know who was the originator of this. Like I said, Shirley Chong was where I found the instructions for it. I gave you the website.
And we'll put a link to that on our show notes on the website.
And whoever came up with this was, and what's interesting is she brings up, I think, some other good points. Like as you get older and your sight gets hard, like the petty paw is a perfect example. The cap that goes around the petty paw has a really small hole that you have to put the nail in. That could be really awkward for someone, that had arthritis in their hands.
Sure, yeah.
Or, so I love this. I mean, having dogs do more of the work.
Like you said, armchair training, having them do it.
It's my favorite kind of training.
Gets you to do a little construction project, too.
Which I think is great, right?
Always fun to get the tools out.
And apparently you can use sandpaper, too. You don't have to use this non-slip tape, but you've got to find something that won't come up at the edges.
Right.
So if you're going to use sandpaper, you got to,
Well, we're going to try this.
We'll
report back on what materials we tried and what worked and what didn't.
This handling class has got me, like I had been, just using a clipper. I'd been manually doing it. And then someone in the class had a petty paw. And I thought, I'm going to try that. I'll see if that's fun. And then someone came up with this idea. So this is one of the reasons why I love teaching classes, because I learned as much from the people in my classes as they learned from me.
No doubt.
It's wonderful.
Right, exactly.
I love this idea.
Well, back to the big picture on what we're talking about today, handling. If you don't have a good handling relationship with your dog, it's possible. It just takes some work. As you expressed early on in the episode, we've got a dog that's a total wet noodle. When she goes to the vet, when she goes to visit people,
they could cut off a limb and she'd be fine with it.
And let's hope that's never the case. But it makes life so much easier, and it makes life so much stressful for our dog.
But I think what we need to say too is that she's not a wet noodle accidentally.
Right.
She was a dog that we spent 20 minutes every single night in puppyhood to probably the first year of her life, handling every part of her. And this is, I'm so glad you brought this up, because when I introduced this topic in puppy class, almost every single person in puppy class that's got a puppy that's 4 months or younger says, I can do whatever I want to my puppy. And so they don't practice.
Right.
And that's true, because guess what? When your puppy's 4 months old, they don't have the physical, psychological, emotional, or intellectual wherewithal to tell you, the person they are 100% dependent upon, that they don't want you to do something. They're pretty malleable at that age, just like an infant is. They don't know how to stage a protest. Once they're 6, 7, 8 months old, their adult jaw muscles are in, their adult teeth are in, they're starting to mature. That's when you start seeing dogs saying, yeah, I know you've been clipping my nails once a month for the last 5 months, but you know what? I don't want you to do it anymore.
Right.
And that actually happened with Surprise.
Yeah, and that malleability disappears really quick.
It totally does. And I mean, so nothing bad had ever happened with Surprise.
Right.
I'd never quicked a nail. About once a month, I'd probably clip all nails. And that was my problem, right? I needed to just clip 1 or 2 nails a day. I needed to be playing around with other things. Now, here's the difference. Silly, who'd had a couple of negative experiences, it took me a month to clip 1 nail. Surprise, who hadn't had any negative experiences, it took me a week.
Right.
So, but Misu, who had been consistently and deliberately handled in this manner her entire first year, will literally let you do anything you want to her.
Yeah, and it really makes vet visits, everything a lot easier. Well, you've been listening to the Canine Campus podcast. We've been talking about counter conditioning. We've been talking about handling. We've been talking about manicures. Spa day at Canine Campus. And we're going to have links to information on raw feeding, on the Whole Dog Journal, on Patricia McConnell's new website, on Susan Garrett's website, on the APDT, and of course on our own website. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, there's not a better way to reach people that are really into their dogs. And if you're interested in participating in the podcast, we can't stress enough what great positive reinforcement it is for us to keep this going when we hear from our listeners. So drop us a line. Visit caninecampus.com. We'll be back in a few weeks, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks a lot, Devin.
Thanks, Dace.